Alright, let's get back into it. We left off right around here. So we'll just start right at the beginning of the page. No, she said, and pushed back some hair behind her ear. She added purely informatively, he's been hitting the road regularly since he was 2, but never very hard. I think the farthest he ever got, in the city at least, was to the mall in Central Park, just a couple of blocks from home. The least far, or nearest, he ever got was to the front door of our building. He stuck around to say goodbye to his father. Both women at the table laughed. The mall's where they all go skating in New York, Sandra said very sociably to Mrs. Snell. The kids and all. Oh, said Mrs. Snell. He was only 3. It was just last year, Boo Boo said, taking out a pack of cigarettes and a folder of matches from a side pocket in her jeans. She lit a cigarette while the 2 women spiritedly watched her. Big excitement. We had the whole police force out looking for him. They find him, said Mrs. Snell. Sure they found him, said Sandra with contempt. What do you think? They found him at 11:15 at night in the middle of, my God, February, I think. Not a child in the park. Just muggers, I guess, and an assortment of roaming degenerates. He was sitting on the floor of the bandstand, rolling a marble back and forth along a crack, half frozen to death and looking... Holy mackerel, said Mrs. Snell. How come he did it? I mean, what was he running away about? Boo Boo blew a single faulty smoke ring at a pane of glass. Some child in the park that afternoon had come up to him with the dreamy misinformation. You stink, kid. At least that's why we think he did it. I don't know, Mrs. Snell. It's all slightly over my head. How long's he been doing it? Asked Miss Snell. I mean, how long's he been doing it? Well, at the age of 2.5, Boo Boo said biographically. He sought refuge under a sink in the basement of our apartment house, down in the laundry. Naomi somebody, a close friend of his, told him she had a worm in her thermos bottle. At least, that's all we could get out of him, Boo Boo sighed, and came away from the window with a long ash on her cigarette. She started for the screen door. I'll have another go at it, she said, by way of goodbye to both women. They laughed. Mildred, Sandra said laughing, addressing Mrs. Snell. You're gonna miss your bus if you don't get a move on. Boo Boo closed the screen door behind her. She stood on the slight downgrade of her front lawn with low, glaring, late-afternoon sun at her back. About 200 yards ahead of her, her son Lionel was sitting in the stern seat of his father's dinghy. Tied and stripped off its main and jib sails, the dinghy floated at a perfect right angle away from the far end of the pier. 50 feet or so beyond it, a lost or abandoned water ski floated bottom up, but there was no pleasure boats to be seen on the lake, just a stern-end view of the county launch on its way over to Leach's Landing. Boo Boo found it queerly difficult to keep Lionel in steady focus. The sun, though not especially hot, was none the less so brilliant that it made any fairly distant image, a boy, a boat, seem almost as wavering and refractional as a stick in water. After a couple of minutes, Boo Boo let the image go. She peeled down her cigarette, army style, and then started toward the pier. It was October, and the pier boards no longer could hit her in the face with reflected heat. She walked along whistling Kentucky Babe through her teeth. When she reached the end of the pier, she squatted, her knees audible, at the right edge and looked down at Lionel. He was less than an oar's length away from her. He didn't look up. Ahoy, Boo Boo said. Friend, pirate, dirty dog, I'm back. Still not looking up, Lionel abruptly seemed called upon to demonstrate his sailing ability. He swung the dead tiller all the way to the right, then immediately yanked it back into his side. He kept his eyes exclusively on the deck of the boat. It is I, Boo Boo said, Vice Admiral Tannenbaum, knee glass, come to inspect the spermophores. There was a response. You aren't an admiral, you're a lady, Lionel said. His sentence usually had at least one break of faulty breath control, so that often his emphasized words rising of faulty, His emphasized words, instead of rising, sank. Boo Boo not only listened to his voice, she seemed to watch it. "Who told you that? Who told you I wasn't an admiral?" Lionel answered, but inaudibly. "Who?" said Boo Boo. "Daddy." Still in a squatting position, Boo Boo put her left hand through the V of her legs, touching the pier boards in order to keep her balance. "Your daddy's a nice fella," she said. "But he's probably the biggest landlubber I know." Oops, it's not focused. Sorry, guys. Let's see if I can focus that. There we go. "He's probably the biggest landlubber I know. It's perfectly true that when I'm in port, I'm a lady. That's true. But my true calling is first, last, and always the bounding—" "You're an admiral," Lionel said. "I beg your pardon?" "You're an admiral. You're a lady all the time." There was a short silence. Lionel filled it by changing the course of his craft again. His hold on the tiller was a two-armed one. He was wearing khaki-colored shorts and a clean white T-shirt with a dye picture across the chest of Jerome the ostrich playing the violin. He was quite tanned, and his hair, which was almost exactly like his mother's in color and quality, was a little sun-bleached on the top. "Many people think I'm not an admiral," Boo Boo said, watching him, "just because I don't shoot my mouth off about it." Keeping her balance, she took a cigarette and matches out of the side pocket of her jeans. "I'm almost never tempted to discuss my rank with people, especially with little boys who don't even look at me when I talk to them. I'd be drummed out of the bloomin' service." Without lighting her cigarette, she suddenly got to her feet, stood unreasonably erect, made an oval out of the thumb and index finger of her right hand, drew the oval to her mouth, and, kazoo style, sounded something like a bugle call. Lionel instantly looked up. In all probability, he was aware that the call was bogus, but nonetheless he seemed deeply aroused. His mouth fell open. Boo Boo sounded the call, a peculiar amalgamation of taps and reveille 3 times without any pauses. Then ceremoniously she saluted the opposite shoreline. When she finally reassumed her squat on the pier edge, she seemed to do so with a maximum regret, as if she had been profoundly moved by one of the virtues of naval tradition. Sorry, guys. Keeps on. Naval tradition closed to the public and small boys. She gazed out at the petty horizon of the lake for a moment, then seemed to remember that she was not absolutely alone. She glanced venerably down at Lionel, whose mouth was still open. That was a secret bugle call that only admirals are allowed to hear. She lit her cigarette and blew out the match with a theatrically thin, long stream of smoke. "If anybody knew I'd let you hear that call." She shook her head. She again fixed the sextant of her eye on the horizon. "Do it again." "Impossible." "Why?" Boo Boo shrugged. "Too many low-grade officers around for one thing." She changed her position, taking up a cross-legged Indian squat. She pulled up her socks. "I'll tell you what I'll do, though," she said matter-of-factly. "If you'll tell me why you're running away, I'll blow every secret bugle call for you I know. All right?" Lionel immediately looked down at the deck again. "No," he said. "Why not?" "Because." "Because why?" "Because I don't want to," said Lionel, and jerked the tiller for emphasis. Boo Boo shielded the right side of her face from the glare of the sun. "You told me you were all through running away," she said. "We talked about it, and you told me you were all through. You promised me." Lionel gave a reply, but it didn't carry. "What?" said Boo Boo. Sorry, guys. "I didn't promise." "Ah, yes, you did. You most certainly did." Lionel resumed steering his boat. "If you're an admiral," he said, "where's your fleet?" "My fleet? I'm glad you asked me that," Boo Boo said, and started to lower herself into the dinghy. "Get off!" Lionel ordered, but without giving over to shrillness, and keeping his eyes down. "Nobody can come in." "They can't." Boo Boo's foot was already touching the bow of the boat. She obediently drew it back up to the pier level. Nobody at all? She got back into her Indian squat. Why not? Lionel's answer was complete, but again, not loud enough. What? Said Boo Boo. Because they're not allowed. Boo Boo, keeping her eyes steadily on the boy, said nothing for a full minute. I'm sorry to hear it, she said finally. I'd just love to come down in your boat. I'm so lonesome for you. I miss you so much. I've been all alone in the house all day without anybody to talk to. Lionel didn't swing the tiller. He examined the grain of wood in its handle. You can talk to Sandra, he said. Sandra's busy, Boo Boo said. Anyway, I don't want to talk to Sandra. I want to talk to you. I want to come down in your boat and talk to you. You can talk from there. What? You can talk from there. No, I can't. It's too big a distance. I have to get up close. Lionel swung the tiller. Nobody can come in, he said. What? Nobody can come in. Well, will you tell me from there why you're running away? Boo Boo asked. After you promised me you were all through? A pair of underwater goggles lay on the deck of the dinghy, near the stern seat. For answer, Lionel secured the head strap of the goggles between the big and second toes of his right foot and with a deft, brief leg action flipped the goggles overboard. They sank at once. That's nice. That's constructive, said Boo Boo. Those belong to your Uncle Webb. Oh, he'll be so delighted. She dragged on her cigarette. They once belonged to your Uncle Seymour. I don't care. I see that. I see you don't, Boo Boo said. Her cigarette was angled peculiarly between her fingers. It burned dangerously close to one of her knuckles' grooves. Suddenly, feeling the heat, she let the cigarette drop to the surface of the lake. Then she took out something from one of her side pockets. It was a package, about the size of a deck of cards, wrapped in white paper and tied with green ribbon. This is a keychain, she said, feeling the boy's eyes look up at her. Just like Daddy's, but with a lot more keys on it than Daddy's has. This one has 10 keys. Lionel leaned forward in his seat, letting go of the tiller. He held out his hands in catching position. Throw it? Yeah, he said. Please? Let's keep our seats a minute, Sunshine. I have a little thinking to do. I should throw this keychain in the lake. Lionel stared up at her with his mouth open. He closed his mouth. It's mine, he said on a diminishing note of justice. Boo Boo, looking down at him, shrugged. I don't care. Lionel slowly sat back in his seat, watching his mother, and reached behind him for the tiller. His eyes reflected pure perception, as his mother had known they would. Here, Boo Boo tossed the package down to him. It landed squarely on his lap. He looked at it in his lap, picked it off, looked at it in his hand, and flicked it, sidearm, into the lake. He then immediately looked up at Boo Boo, his eyes filled not with defiance, but tears. In another instant, his mouth was distorted in a horizontal figure 8, and he was crying mightily. Boo Boo got to her feet, gingerly, like someone whose foot had gone to sleep in the theater, and lowered herself into the dinghy. In a moment she was in the stern seat, with the pilot on her lap, and she was rocking him and kissing the back of his neck and giving out certain information. Sailors don't cry, baby. Sailors never cry. Only when their ships go down, or when they're shipwrecked, or rafts, and all, with nothing to drink except... Sorry, guys, about the ringing. Give me a second. Son. Or when they're shipwrecked, on rafts and all, with nothing to drink except... Sandra told Mrs. Snell that Daddy's a big, sloppy kike. Just perceptibly, Boo Boo flinched, but she lifted the boy off her lap and stood him in front of her and pushed back his hair from his forehead. She did, huh? She said. Lionel worked his head up and down emphatically. He came in closer, still crying, to stand between his mother's legs. Well, that isn't too terrible, Boo Boo said, holding him between the two vices of her arms and legs. That isn't the worst that could happen. She gently bit the rim of the boy's ear. Do you know what a kike is, baby? Lionel was either unwilling or unable to speak up at once. At any rate, he waited till the hiccuping aftermath of his tears had subsided a little. Then his answer was delivered, muffled but intelligible, into the warmth of Boo Boo's neck. It's one of those things that go up in the air, he said, with string you hold. Sorry, this is about to end the video, so we're going to go into another video. Sorry, guys.